Welcome to another episode of Haunted Vermont Podcast. My name is Paul Doski, and joining us is the man behind the New England Legends himself and everything else that's spooky, because we're here talking with none other than Jeff Belanger. Jeff, welcome aboard.
Hey, thanks for having me, Paul.
Well, it's a pleasure. I've kind of found your work from, correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say it was like PBS, your TV show there for New England Legends.
Yep.
And at the time, I want to say you had about 6 episodes at that current time, and it looked like you've added a few more, like as the years had gone by. I think recently you just added like 2 new ones, and you do books, you do your own podcast, and every now and then we get a new episode, like I said, for like this show as well. But other than me trying to tell people of who you are, what would you tell people who Jeff Belanger is?
It's a tough question to answer, which is ridiculous for me to say that, because it's me. But I've been interested in all things strange, unexplained, paranormal pretty much my whole life. And I grew up in a little town in Connecticut called Sandy Hook. And I knew Ed and Lorraine Warren since I was 13 years old. So I was sort of exposed to all this stuff from a very young age. And I had friends who said their houses were haunted. So as I got older, I just was intrigued. I would see the Warrens speak at local libraries and stuff in the fall. And then I went to school to be a writer, and I started writing for newspapers and magazines. And around October, you go looking for ghost stories. And I loved that. I love history. I love talking to people. I love the intrigue and the unexplained. And that turned into a website. And then I started writing books. And then in 2008, I started working for the show Ghost Adventures on the Travel Channel, now Discovery. And I've worked on that show for 15 years now. And suddenly one day I woke up and just realized that this is my full-time job. And New England Legends started in 2012 as a series on PBS. And then it turned into a podcast in 2017. And I do speaking engagements. So I'm an author. I write books. I'm a podcaster. I'm a TV host. But at the end of the day, I love this subject, and I love capturing these stories. And then where and how I tell them is, how you may or may not have heard of me.
That's a pretty fair answer, I would say. I mean, like how much more could you like really just dive into it more without dissecting every type of categories, I may say.
Yeah. So like, I don't consider myself a paranormal investigator anymore. I mean, I did for a while where, I had the gear and the EMF meters and all that stuff. And I work for a show that's a paranormal investigative show. I like the research, the history, and talking to people. And I love going to these places and sort of breathing in the air. But the idea of sitting in the dark all night with an EMF meter is just not my idea of a good time. And I'm not disparaging people who do that at all. I don't want it to sound that way. I mean, by all means, go for it. I mean, I love that people are trying to like collect data and verify the kinds of experiences they have. But in my experience, if you went fishing, every weekend for a year and you only caught one fish, I don't know, maybe fishing isn't for you. You know what I mean? And so that's how I look at it, is like, I wasn't really catching many fish, but I did like going to the lake, and I like walking around the lake and the pond and the woods and all that other stuff. So at some point I realized I didn't care if I caught a fish or not. I know where the fish were. And in this case, fish is the metaphor for ghosts. So, I accept that I'm just not really a traditional paranormal investigator, but I am a traditional researcher and writer and explorer of this stuff.
Well, that's perfect. And I get what you're saying too about the whole, like, if you go fishing and you only get one fish a year, it's almost like saying like, you want to go to a place that's doing like a paranormal investigation, right? And then, however, though, now with the way things have changed in the past, I don't know, I'm just going to say 10 years or so, places are starting to charge for paranormal investigation. So if you were to go, let's just say for $80, that gives you the event, and then afterward you get to go and investigate for how many hours. I'm not really sure how that works. But if you're only there, let's just say once every year, or once every other month, let's just say, depending on how active their events are for this particular place. But you only get one, like you're saying, one fish out of the year, and you only get one event happened throughout the entire time you're there. Is spending that etc. amount of money really worth it? And I'm not trying to say it's not, because some places are doing it for a good cause. Like we have a place that's doing it to restore their foundation, which is by all means like probably the best thing you want to do. You want to keep it. You want to keep it up without it crumbling.
As buildings go, foundations are up there in importance. That's true.
Yes, yes, and it's just like when does it become to a point where you're saying, I kind of need that money for my own personal thing.
No, totally. And well, the other thing, I mean, I don't know. I don't mean to sound like a big deal, but I don't really pay to go to those places. Like I usually get brought in, you know what I mean? And so, and the other thing, let me say this: when I'm doing something serious, for me, the ideal number of people in a building, ideal, is 3 total, right? Like that, me and like 2 others, because you can control, in my experience, 3 people. Beyond 3, even 4 gets to be tough. You know what I mean? And these have to be people you trust and so on. So if you're in a building and there's 20 people in there for an event and you're hearing voices somewhere, like, I mean, maybe it's paranormal, but it could also be people in the next room whispering to each other, right? Not trying to mess with anybody. They're just whispering. They're talking about something, So it's very difficult to control an environment when it's full of people. But if it's just 3 of you, and you can, and you sort of own, like, yeah, that was my stomach. I can't tell you how many, EVPs people get where you hear like, and you're like, it's a demon. You're like, no. Remember we had Taco Bell before? That was my stomach. That was absolutely my guts churning on that Taco Bell. Not a demon. Well, maybe a demon, but not like you're thinking. So anyway, but if you've got 3 people, you can kind of control that. And alone, and I've done it alone too, which is really great because it's wonderfully scary when you're alone in a haunted place. But if you see something, if you see like an apparition move in front of you, you don't have a second person. It's where I could be like, hey, Paul, look over there in the corner. What do you see? And if you're like, I see a woman, like coming toward us, be like, okay, yep, that's what I see too. Let's run. So you don't have that validation. Like, is it just me? Am I overtired? Am I confused? Am I scared? Scaring myself into getting the jitters? So one isn't ideal, and also safety, right? What if you break an ankle and there's no one to just carry you out? So I like a small group, and then you go in and you see what you see. But I like just exploring the legend of it, exploring the story, and being where it happened. And you sort of put yourself into that place. Like, if this is a building where someone was murdered, or this is a place where people died, or where history left a mark, you sort of connect to that. And that's, to me, the most fun part of what we do.
Yeah, and I can't really agree with that anymore. Like, I think that's what I loved about diving more into what was going on at the time to make, the legend or stories or whatever is going on, like, come to fruition, to make it seem like, okay, well, what the bumpy part of it? Is there a bump in the road? And is there enough proof to really say, like, this is really who it could be? Because we don't. So sometimes, Jeff, like, they'll say a place is haunted, and then when you ask somebody, they're like, who do you think it is, or what do you think it is? They're like, I don't know. And then sometimes, you see the TV shows too, I bet, and you probably have been told too, like, a lot of people think like their family is still around, when sometimes it could not even be. It could be like a complete 180, They think it's right. One thing, and then it's really not.
Yeah, well, so we live in a chaotic world, and it's a frightening world, right? Scary things happen. You have access to the news just like I do. So when you see something that doesn't make sense, so if you live in a place and suddenly you're hearing footsteps, or you're hearing voices and you're like, wait a minute, there's only 2 of us here. We're in the same room. We're hearing voices from the other room. Like, this can't be. You to give yourself a sense of control, you want to put a name on it. Oh, that must be Uncle Larry. Remember, he died 2 years ago. And you could be wrong. You could be so wrong, right? It's all you heard was murmuring voices or footsteps. But if you give it a name, you feel better, as opposed to, I don't know what that is. It's clearly not a living person, and it's not the building. So I'm scared out of my mind. Like, you give it a name to give yourself a sense of control. Even if you're wrong, you sort of move on with it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair answer too. And that's how we kind of cope with even with other things too. Like, once we kind of determine this is the ground base of what we're gonna tell ourselves, that's what we're gonna stick by until whatever. Like, maybe that proof comes into play later, and it's like, oh, I'm wrong. Okay, so now I actually know, or whatever.
Well, like, right. It's so what can happen too. It's so as a guy who really takes the research part seriously, sometimes people can come in and they'll bring in like a psychic medium or something like that. He'll say like, oh, it's the ghost of a little girl who died here in 1847. And you're like, okay, that's fine. And that's interesting. But then let's look in the history. And did a girl die there in 1847? If that's true, amazing. But,
right.
But then like there's the classic trope of like, oh, well, it just wasn't reported. I'm like, deaths are kind of always reported. They really are. It's that's the kind of thing that people take note of when someone dies. So you hate to have wrong information introduced into a story and then just get repeated and repeated.
Yeah, and we have quite a few of those type of legends throughout my state and pretty much all of New England, where there's just not like a death certificate for this person that's supposedly haunted. So it's like, where did that name come from? But
right.
Yeah, I mean, that's just going into a gigantic rabbit hole, and yeah, we've all been there, done that. So, I mean, some people have come out to say, they're the ones that started it to begin with. So, I mean, who knows? Who really knows?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's the fun of it. And so to me, like the story exists. Like, why are we talking about this one place being haunted, that place, those woods having a monster in it? Why are we talking about that? And the reason is because, like, collectively people have had strange experiences and they talk about it, and other people go there to check it out, and other people have strange experiences. So to me, like, you go back in time, right? You go back one step to the next, to the next, to the next, and try to figure out, well, what exactly happened that led to this? And that, to me, that's the most fun part of the journey, is to go back in time and experience it. And that's why, that's why I do what I do.
Yeah. Yes, and I must say, and you do it very well. And
thanks.
And I bet that took some practice too, I would say, because I mean, because I bet there's some stories where I'm trying to think, like maybe we'll just say for TV wise or even for the podcast, because you got that runtime, and then there had to have been somewhere, there's just so much information, and it's like, how much can we even put in without maybe trying to say, like, we might need to do this in a two-parter?
Oh, sure. So, that's the challenge of telling any story. And when I say story, I don't mean fiction. I mean, like, you've like you said, you've got a broadcast, a word count. You're writing an article. You're writing a book. I mean, everything has a finite amount of time. Plus, as a person who makes his living telling these stories, finding and telling these stories, I don't want to bore you, right? So if I'm talking about a haunted building in Vermont, let's say, do you really care who the architect was in 1822? Do you care? Do you care that the nails were imported from Germany? Like, maybe if there's like some tie there, but like, does it really, are those the things you care about? Or do you care about like the family murder that happened, 30 years after the house was built? And so, I understand that you want to put stuff into context, and that's the challenge of those of us who, put stuff out there for people to consume. What do you leave in and what do you leave out? If I could tell you everything, but you'd be bored silly. Working for Ghost Adventures for 15 years, people complain. One of the biggest complaints, and this is about all the paranormal shows, by the way, not just Ghost Adventures, is like, oh, that's not really what an investigation's like. I'm like, I get it, but you're watching a highlight reel. You've got like 8 to 10 cameras rolling for hours and hours, and it all gets boiled down to just like 20 something minutes of footage. So if I've heard people say like, I should have my own show, ghost hunting. I'm like, yeah, right. So we go ghost hunting, and we're there from like 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. Does people really want to watch us arguing over whose turn it is to go get coffee? You know what I mean? You
No,
sit
I
there
know.
you
Yep.
sit there for hours with nothing happening. You set up your equipment, and sometimes the exciting moment doesn't even happen till weeks later when you're reviewing the stuff you captured, the audio, the video, and so on. You're reviewing it later in your living room, and you go, "Oh, geez, look at that! We caught something, but didn't see it at the time."
Right.
So yeah, real investigation, real research is remarkably boring to watch. The excitement comes for the person doing it. You love what you do, and then presenting it, saying like, hey, I sift through all the crap for you. Like I didn't make you sit there for hours and hours going through all the footage and all the video, and now here's the best part. And then people get confused thinking, well, if I did this, I would go somewhere and I'd see a ghost like every 3 minutes and then would go to commercial, and that's just not how it works.
No, it really is not how it works. And uh, I think that one of the downfalls of, I guess I'm just going to say entertainment TV, I guess, because everybody thinks it's just entertainment when really they don't really understand, when these shows are being created, especially paranormal shows, like you said, we could go into a place from 9 to 3 a.m. Even out of all that time we're there, Jeff, right? Like maybe one thing could have happened, but when was that? Maybe like right before we left, right? Like, I mean, so then what do you got to do? You kind of got to fill in we're trying, and then right at the very end, maybe throw in that like, oh, hey, what's that? Like, why did that
Right.
just happen as we leave?
Yeah. Right. And you're wondering too, in my experience with this, and this is a question I've had, and I don't have an answer. I'm just going to ask it anyway. Like, so are people haunted or are places haunted? And I suspect it's a little bit of both. You
I
know what I
would
mean?
agree.
Yeah. So like sometimes there's people who are just highly sensitive to this stuff, and they have experiences like almost everywhere they go. I'm not one of those people. I'm what they call insensitive. But then there's other people that only have these experiences when they go to certain places that are known to be haunted, and it's dark and it's after hours and we're walking around and we're looking for ghosts. And so my question is, are you seeing something related to that place, or are you seeing something related to you? And if you're just open to it because you're in that place. These are the questions that keep me up at night. I don't have answers, but they're things I think about.
What a great question. I mean, hopefully one day we'll get the answer, right?
Yeah, but then how do we come back and tell people? Because we're dead.
Well, I guess we'll have to figure that one out, huh? Maybe put
Right.
it on the voice recorder.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
that's
right.
what
Yeah.
we should do.
Paul, it's all true. I'm here. I'm dead.
Oh, I gotta play this back again.
Yeah. It says get out.
It said
Yeah.
get out for the 100th time. Oh, okay, we heard this 100 times now. Stop it. Yeah, no, well, I don't know how many times you've heard of Jeff too in your line of work as well, but like, have anybody really came up to you and been like, Jeff, have you ever thought about how ghosts walk through walls?
Yeah, sure. People have asked me that. So,
Well,
what's my answer? So, I mean, I don't know. Like, first of all, I know enough about physics to know that nothing is actually solid. I mean, if you have
right.
a glass that you're drinking beer out of, that glass is not actually solid. It's mostly solid. It holds the beer, sure enough. But if you get down to the molecular level, it's not. So if ghosts, whatever they are comprised of energy, well, radio signals and cell signals go through walls every minute of every day. So if something is energetic, then it could go through walls easy enough. Here's a better question, Paul, that I got asked. A very great skeptical question. Why aren't ghosts naked?
I've heard that one too.
It's great. That's my favorite. I love it because it's a rock solid question. You're like, okay, I can get my head around a person having a soul or a spirit, but why are they clothed? Why would I see grandpa in his old war uniform or grandma in her wedding dress or something like that? The clothes don't have a soul. The person might. And it's a great question. It's a very good thought experiment. And the best I've come up with is that if I were to ask you and anyone listening right now to close their eyes and take a mental picture of yourself, just imagine yourself somewhere where you're comfortable. And if you do it right now, I just picture yourself, see yourself from outside. Did you picture yourself naked, or did you picture yourself with clothes? Right? I mean, I've done this in front of live audiences with hundreds of people, and some smart ass will sometimes put their hand up and go, "I was naked." I'm like, "Yeah, I get it," but the overwhelming majority of people see themselves in clothes. Maybe
Yep.
they got dressed up. Maybe a woman put on a ball gown, or maybe you're in your sweatpants and comfortable. Whatever it is, you pictured yourself clothed. And then the next question is, why don't ghosts have feet? Not all of them, of course, but why do we just see like the upper body, floating? When you pictured yourself, did you see your feet? Or was it just sort of like your upper torso? And so I think sometimes these things are a projection, and a projection of what they want us to see. And so imagine if like grandpa dies and he appears before his 10-year-old grandson, looking older like he was in life, but clothed. Because if he was naked, that's the kind of thing that'll scar you for life. I saw my
Yep.
grandpa's naked ghost 2 weeks after he died. Right? There's not enough therapy in the world to cure that one.
No.
So I think sometimes it's a projection, and maybe that same person appears before his widow, looking 30 and in the prime of his life. And just like, look at me, remember this, and maybe So to me, a ghost is a message, and every message needs at least two people, right? Every message in the world needs two people. There has to be a sender and a receiver. You can have more than two, but there has to be a minimum of two. There can't be one. If you go in the woods and there's no one around for miles and you shout the winning lottery numbers, it doesn't matter. No one's there to receive the message. You're just broadcasting. You're not communicating. You're not sending them. You're just yelling. But if there's someone there to hear it, well, you're sending a message and someone is receiving a message. And I think a ghost in every single case, at the very least, is a message.
Perfect. So, Jeff, I will touch on that question, and I will go back to the question that I was asking. The kind of go walk through walls, or why can, or whatever. So this is my theory, and I saw it once on a image, and after like really looking at that image, I was like, you know what, that makes a lot of sense. So imagine, Jeff, like where you are, or anybody even listening, I'll just say, and you happen to see a ghost walk through a wall, right? Mm-hmm. Now, let's just say you went and grabbed the old blueprint to your house, and maybe, just maybe, where you saw that apparition walk through the wall, currently in the present day, maybe back in, like, let's just say the 1800s, there was a door right there, some sort of doorway, some open wall, and that's how the spirit knows that used to be where they would walk through to get to the other room. But sure, now it's, walled off or whatever. So that would be my way of saying, as time go, the designs of houses, rooms, they always change. And sure, so maybe that's what's going on, is the spirit is remembering their old house layout, and that's why we see them, walk through walls.
I interviewed a woman once down in, I think it was Carnton, Tennessee, and she was talking about how her house was haunted. Her house was built in like the 1970s, not very old at all, right? No. And so she said she has a basement where her washer and dryer are, where lots of people keep their washer and dryer. And, yep, and you know how basements have those windows at the very top? They're very small, but they're at the top of the basement, and look, can let you look out. So mm-hmm, she would look out in her yard, and she would see legs walking like 2 feet above the grass, just like phantom legs walking by. And that was really weird to her. And so she started to do some research, and she learned that her house stood on ground that was once a Civil War field hospital. And then suddenly it all started to make sense. When you clear land to put in a house, you grade the lawn, right? You need a relatively flat lawn, so you grade down the the land around the house when you put it in. Right. And so her guess is like that's probably where the land was 200 years ago. It was probably up a couple of feet before this land was cleared to put in this house and put in this lawn. And so, yeah, maybe that's where they were walking. all those years ago.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is. The Earth is always, changing around us, so why not? So,
Yeah,
it's,
well, or we change it for our own needs. We change it
well,
for putting a
yeah.
building in,
Yeah, and sometimes it could just be from earthshakes or earthquakes or something,
Well, yeah,
something Mother Nature that is trying to tell us otherwise
things are
or
always
punishing
changing.
us.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, no kidding.
So the other question that you said is why is Ghost not naked, basically. So my theory to that is, well, maybe when we go, we have that ability to basically choose when one in our lifetime would we be considered the most happiest? So maybe like in the example that you were giving, Grandpa who passed away is in his PJs. Maybe that was his comfortable, happy time was when he was in his PJs. Maybe reading the morning paper, watching TV, like most grandpas would do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess I would say, because I've heard stories where why would this grown up who passes away want to go back to maybe being like a child spirit, where they had the ability to possibly choose to go back to be 7 years old. It's like because that was when they enjoyed life, I guess. They want to relive their childhood memories, or maybe they didn't really have a good childhood memory, so now they want to fix that is, I guess, how I would kind of throw that out
Yeah, yeah.
to
But the
people.
reality is we don't know, and that's what the fun of this is we can speculate. Or maybe what you're seeing is just a movie that's playing over and over. It's not there. The person's gone, but that movie remains, and it's not always there. It just for some reason some of us can tune into it at certain times, and you're seeing a scene that played out. And the funny thing is, it's always a very mundane scene, in what people might call like a residual haunting, or the stone tape theory, the idea that events can get imprinted on a location, which I think there's a lot of credence to that. And the example I've used is if you've ever walked into a home where usually a married couple lives and there's just been a big argument. You weren't there for the argument, but you just walked in right after. And you walk in and you're like, hey, how's it going? Good to see you. Whoa, my goodness. Everything okay in here? Like no one said a word, but you just feel the tension. You know what I mean? You
Yes.
feel that. So that argument left that energy imprint that you picked up on just minutes after it happened when you walked in and we're like, we're fine. Everything's fine. Like, oh, no, you're not, but it's none of my business. So, okay. And so imagine something like that, but on a bigger scale, like a murder or a death. And then you walk into a room and you pick up on something. It's called, I mean, if you want to say it, I guess we're all psychic or to some degree, but I just think it's human empathy. I mean, if you walked into an empty room, let's say you're visiting a museum and the museum is mostly empty. There's hardly anyone there. And you walk into a big empty room and there's a person sitting in the corner just sobbing, crying. Wouldn't you walk over and just say like, hey, do you want to talk about it? Are you okay? Right? Like, not that you're a social worker or something, but you're a human being. And that maybe there's someone that needs help and maybe you can help a little bit. Like I lost my kid. Oh, well, shoot, let me help you look. Let's call the security. Let's whatever. I mean, it's sort of callous to me if you walk into an empty room and someone's crying and you just walk by, like that. To me, I couldn't do it. I would be incapable of walking by.
Good point. Like, I almost want to keep saying residual haunting every time you say imprint. So,
Mm-hmm.
but yes, movie scenes. Yeah, that's basically what it is, though. It's basically a residual haunting. It's just
Yeah.
one scene playing over and over and over again. I mean, another great example would be, look at Gettysburg.
Yeah.
One of the
Yeah.
bloodiest battles that took place ever. And and you're gonna tell me that nothing got left there? Like, think of all the bodies that died there, all the blood, like everything. Like, yeah, there's something definitely left there, and even to this day, people still say like the war is still going on, and it's like, well, yeah. I mean, it makes me wonder though: is it always the same play out? I guess I want to say, or are they really thinking like, the war is still going on, like almost like in an intelligent way.
So this is where I sort of differ on some of this stuff. I've been to Gettysburg many times over the
Mm-hmm.
years, and incredible place, powerful place. Everyone should go for sure. If you have any sort of interest in history, America, ghosts, or any of the above, you should go there. Make a pilgrimage. Um, so with Gettysburg, I think in a weird way that ghosts are here because we, the living, summon them. We literally summon them. And I'm not talking about some kind of weird ritual or something like that. I just mean that when we call up their memories, we're literally calling them up. And Gettysburg is a place that's haunted because it should be haunted, because that should haunt us. This is what can happen in your own country. This is how bad it can get. This nation's been pretty politically divided for a while now, for, many years. And thanks to the internet and politics and all that other stuff, it can be ugly. There's no question. But someone like me often laughs when people are like, we're the most divided we've ever been in the history of the country. I'm like, I picture every ghost in Gettysburg rising from the grave and laughing and laughing and laughing and saying, tell me about divided again. You guys are arguing on the internet. We know divided. This is what America divided can look like. Gettysburg. Not like my feelings are hurt because, you called me a name, or you voted for this person, or you hate that person. No, this is what divided looks like. This is how bad it can get. So shut up and calm yourself down, right?
Right.
Discord is okay. Like, Discord's good. We have discussions, we have debates, but we debate. And that means you have to listen to my side and I have to listen to your side. Or as bad as it can get is Gettysburg. So come here, let it haunt you, let you understand how many people died just trying to take a hill. Like, not even win a war, right? They were just trying to take that hill, and they were gunned down and forever lost. That's what a divided country looks like. So get over it and let the past haunt you a little bit. So maybe we can listen to each other a little bit more in these modern times and not get back to a place where Gettysburg has to happen again.
Well, yeah, I'm not even going to touch that, but I think we all know the answer to that. Like, we don't want more wars, but at the same time, it's like that's our human ways of, quote, solving things, I guess. I don't know.
But especially civil wars, right? Like, it's one thing to go to war with another nation over resources or disagreements or terrorism or something like that, but to go to war with yourself. You know what I mean? Like, come on. Like, we're all living in the same land. Like, we gotta try a little better. We gotta do a little better. That's all. And when you study the past, when you study ghosts and so on, I think it's a good reminder. Like, come on, do better. We've been in worse places before. When COVID hit, everybody lost their mind. I get it. Scary time for sure. And I don't care where anybody stands on the science of it or not the science of it. When this all went down, especially in the podcast, I started doing a lot of stories about New England vampires. There's been a bunch. Vermont too. Vermont's had a few vampires. Vampires in the 1700s, 1800s, and even before that were consumption victims. Tuberculosis. Tuberculosis was a plague. You could catch it. It was contagious. It went around. And, it's so easy to think of our ancestors from just 100 years ago, 200 years ago as being stupid. They weren't stupid. They really weren't. They understood, contagion. They knew, just like today, when your kid comes in the house with a cold, pretty soon everybody's going to have the cold, right? I mean, that's how it works. And so they understood that. But when this plague wastes you away to nothing, when this bacteria gets into your lungs and you can't figure out like why the family down the street was untouched, and your family, like half of them died, in another town nobody died, and in this town everybody died, you really start to look for what we talked about before. You'd start to look for like order in the chaos, and you say, well, it can't just be like random acts of bacteria being passed around people and getting them sick and killing them. It must be a vampire, that we must be being hunted by some creature, as opposed to just dumb luck with a virus. So when COVID hit, I'm like, oh man, we've been here before. We've been here before. We've been in scary times, not just the flu of 1918, but consumption and tuberculosis. These things do happen to us. And in every case, people get scared and they get angry. And so I kind of feel like if we can revisit some of these stories from the past, maybe we can get a little perspective on the present.
That's yeah. It's a good way to look at it. And since you mentioned the New England vampires there, Jeff, out of the one that you have done, or I should say, yeah, done. How to say, which Vermont tale of the New England vampires do you like? Which one really grabbed your attention?
So there's a bunch. There's one from Woodstock, Vermont. That was probably the first one I looked into. And by the way, vampires all over New England. And I'll put in a shameless plug for a friend of mine's book. Dr. Michael Bell wrote a book called Food for the Dead. And if you're into New England vampire stories, that's the book to get. He covers almost all of them. But in Woodstock, Vermont, back in 1830, there was a guy named Corwin who was, the family had consumption, had tuberculosis. And at some point, someone in his family suspected that he was the vampire, that Corwin was the vampire. And so what they did was the family exhumed the body, pulled the heart out of his chest, and then burned it. And that was one of the cures for vampirism. Now, it sounds insane to us today. I get it. In our modern times, you're like, how is that going to cure anything when you dig a body up? The body's already dead, and if it's 6 feet down, it's not going to get anybody sick now, right? So, and by the way, this case is not unique. This happened all over the world and all over New England. It was not the only case, but people were desperate. If you live in a family where like one person after the other is getting this illness and getting sick, and someone says to you, hey, there's an old school way to deal with this, you may be the victim of a vampire. And if you can find who the vampire is and break the spell, your loved one may get better, and the rest of you may not get sick. When you're scared because of a virus, or in this case, a bacteria, when you're scared, you make decisions out of fear, but also out of love, right? So like you love your family, you love your children, you love yourself, and you want to keep them safe. And if you're praying as hard as you can pray, and you're going to the doctor and doing everything you're supposed to do, and still someone in your family gets sick with this potential death sentence because consumption killed a lot of people,
Yes.
you're like, okay, I tried all that. Let me try this, because I want to make sure that I know at the end of the day I've tried everything I can possibly try. And I assure you, in 1830, the people that were digging up the body of their loved one and pulling the heart out and burning it felt a little crazy. I'm sure of it, right? They weren't thinking like, no, this is what you do. They were just desperate, and they were scared, and they loved the people in their families. And so, so that happened. And here's the crazy thing that blows people's minds. Sometimes these these cures work. Now you could say, well, the person was going to get better anyway, and burning the heart had nothing to do with anything. You're probably right. But sometimes you burn the heart and then the person gets better, and then everyone goes, oh, that's the cure. That's the thing. There was another vampire in Manchester, Vermont. That one was 1793. Another consumption victim, tuberculosis, Rachel Harris Burton. And the strange thing about her is that she was exhumed 3 years after she was in the ground. One of the signs of vampirism, according to the folklore, is that if you dig up a body and it appears to be not decomposing, then that's a sign that it's rising out of the grave and feeding on the living. And so this woman was pulled out of the ground 3 years later. When you're in the ground, and this is before the days of embalming, when you're not embalmed and you're put into the ground, in 3 years, there's not much left of you. I mean, there's going to be very little, even in a sealed box. But they saw enough that they pulled the vital organs from her body and they burned them in a forge in an effort to break the vampire spell on the family. And so that's the thing. And I mean, and if all this sounds that silly to you, like, remember people hoarding toilet paper, right? In COVID, remember some of the stuff people were doing, or refusing to wear a mask, and they're just going to pray, and I won't get vaccinated, and whatever. I mean, I'm really not trying to pick on anybody who made any decision whatsoever. You did the best with the information you had. But there were people there's people today who like they get sick. They're like, I'm going to pray. And okay, by all means pray. I'm not saying not to pray, but some of those people die and medicine might have saved them. You know what I mean? But we'll have no way of knowing because you didn't give the medicine a chance. So, so anyway, we sometimes lose our ability to reason when we're scared, and we act out and we try things that we would never try under normal circumstances because fear makes us do things that we wouldn't normally do. When you're scared under any conditions, you know, there's I call it the thinky part of your brain, right? The cerebral cortex, like the part where you do your thinking when you're calm and at peace. When you're scared, you're unable to access that part of your brain. When you're scared, it's fight or flight. That's all we can do when we're in fear, and that's normal. That's in any situation, and probably a good thing. I mean, if you're in a dark alley and someone jumps out in front of you with a knife, you don't want to be thinking about like, well, maybe I should try to talk to him. And no, you're thinking, should I run for it or should I attack him and see if I can get out of this? So we all have to sort of understand how we work, how the world works, and put it all into perspective. But no matter what happens, it seems like we've sort of been there before when it comes to just about anything, any situation that the world can give us. We've been there before.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll even throw in. I'll probably butcher the town how you pronounce it, but Dummerston.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
with the family for Spalding. You know that. Yeah. I actually didn't realize there was a story there. And when I read about it first, and then you guys actually did a podcast on it, which I thought was really hilarious because when I was kind of reading about it and stuff, it's sort of when you guys released the episode. So I was
just it's just like 2 weeks ago. We did that one pretty recently, yeah.
Yeah, and we're just like wow, like this is just interesting and weird at the same time that I'm reading it, and then you guys like post it up. But anyway, the point to this is like I just found after reading that one very fascinating about the strange root and just killing off the family. And I think what makes it even more weird is like as the family was fallen from whatever was going on, from tuberculosis or consumption. The fact that this family had to be split in two different cemeteries is very weird as well. Because, like, if you're trying to find a particular person, you have to go to one cemetery, and then if you want the rest, you have to go to the other cemetery.
Well, the dad, when the dad passed away, he... I think the ground was too wet in the main cemetery. Yeah, so he had to be buried somewhere else just because it was all mud. They couldn't dig. So that was just sort of circumstantial. And if he had died at a different time of the year, it might have been fine. But so some of that, you know, is circumstantial, but it looks weird. And you're right. This story is a little different because usually it's just like, okay, people are dying, but they added the black root. And so when you go to the cemetery in Dummerston, there's a row of Spaldings that are buried next to each other. Not unusual. Families get buried near each other. They buy sections of cemeteries and all the Spaldings are in one section. That's not unusual at all. No. But there's this row of graves and you see how rapidly they were dying. And then the story of the black root, that when they were digging up the graves to look for the vampire, they found the black root would go from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And it just adds an entirely eerie element that we're not even sure is true, by the way. We can't promise you that black root was there. But the story's there, and those people absolutely did die when they said they died. You can see it right there on the headstones. Yes. But it's such a great twist to it, the idea that this root's going to slowly grow, and by the time it reaches the next one, the next family member dies.
Yes, and this family is not the first family in New England, as far as I know, that mentioned something about a strange root either. So.
Yeah, well, you know, again, we look for reason when we can't find one. But yeah, no, that's a great one. I love that. That story was a great one to work on. Every town has its stories. Every single town. Like I've yet to find one that has like nothing. You know, anytime there's people leave a mark. They leave stories behind. And every town has got its haunts, got its monsters, got its strangeness, its oddities, and so on, that people keep talking about. And what a cool thing. Like what a cool way to sort of meet your neighbors, you know?
Exactly. And you just never know. Maybe they might know something. They've heard of something back in the day that you never even heard of before because that's what they were told when they were growing up. So now, now it's their turn to tell you to pass on that story. And next thing you know, is like what you do is it becomes a legend. You're keeping it alive. You're not letting it just like I guess fade into the oblivion of not existing anymore. I don't really know a good terminology for that, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where Jeff, like, have you thought about like after like people like us who are collecting the stories or trying to share stories, like who's going to be the next people to step up to kind of keep these next stories alive? Like it's really interesting to really try to figure out like man, how much longer can these stories actually continue before finally they're gone. Nobody remembers them.
Well, so that's a natural. Okay, that actually I know. So a legend. When I say legend, people who are kind of like paranormal purists sometimes get mad at me, thinking like, "Oh, it's not just a story." I don't think it's just a story. I think there's something behind it. But a legend is the story that gets created around an event or a thing or even a person that's bigger than the person or place or thing could ever have been. For example, right? I'm a football fan. Tom Brady is a legend, right? Tom Brady's a legend. When you take the field against him, let's say, a few years ago, you're already scared and he hasn't done anything yet. Why? Because of everything he did before that. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm facing a real beast. And any sport has their legends where you're just like, when a rookie gets onto the court against this legend, they're already intimidated. You know what I mean? And nothing's even happened yet. The game hasn't even started. And so, but at the end of the day, Tom Brady is just a person. He's just done spectacular things on the football field. These legends out there in the world, the ghosts, the monsters, the vampires, and so on, they can go away, but only when a community stops talking about them. So it's not up to you or me, right? It's up to the community. Like, when people stop talking about them, you and I will stop hearing about them, and then they go away. And then there'll be new ones. There'll be new stories that take it over, and we'll talk about those. So there is sort of like a life cycle to them. Some of them stick around for centuries, and others stick around for just a few years, and then we just sort of move on.
Fair enough. So speaking of, which, like what's kind of come back a little bit to like your writings and your shows and stuff, because obviously before you do your episodes, I'm assuming for your PBS series, not only are you trying to look up information, you're trying to talk to people and get the location and stuff like that. Couple years back, I want to say. I don't think it was last year, but anyway, you did one on Bowman Mansion,
Oh
here in
yeah.
Cuttenville,
Yeah.
and I already know, like, that story is pretty well known. I would say, if not, then I'm really surprised. I guess. Not only that, but you had special guests, Joseph Citro to help talk about the tale as well.
Yeah.
I guess, if you wouldn't mind, just give us like a rundown of how like that episode kind of came to be.
So that the Bowman episode came to be because the guy I work with on the show, my producing partner Tony Dunn, would drive up to Vermont and go by the house, the Bowman Mansion, but also the cemetery, which is directly across the street from the mansion. And his family used to take him up there when he was a kid. And he drove by and he would always see this white ghostly man on the side of the road, like walking into a crypt, and it freaked him out every time. If you've ever driven by, that white ghostly man is a statue. It's the statue of Mr. Bowman, who is like forever visiting his family, who's interred inside this little mausoleum, this little stone house right across the street from the mansion that he built. And so that was one of those things where Tony, like, that was his story. He's like, I want us to look into this. I'm like, all right, cool. Let's start looking into it. And then when I did, I was like, wow. So Bowman was a wealthy person. He built this mansion for his family, but he made his fortune in New York, and so and his family started to die in New York. So he built this mansion and he built the mausoleum across the street, and he moved the bodies from New York to this mausoleum so they could be there across the street. He believed not only in reincarnation, but he believed that his family was one day going to rise up from the grave and they would need a place to live. So he built this spacious mansion, and he believed that for himself too. Not only that, he had water installed into the mausoleum. So there's a well that with a pipe that runs water into the mausoleum. So if the family wakes up from the grave, they'll have water until he checks on them. He would diligently visit them every single day. And that statue was built while Bowman was still alive. So the statue's there, and then eventually Bowman was interred there as well. So his whole family's in there. And when Bowman died, he was still so certain that all of them would rise from the grave and be able to live their lives again, that he left his fortune in a trust and said, I would like, food stocked in the kitchen of the mansion, and the house cleaned and so on, and made ready for his family to come back and go into the house across the street. And they did that until the money ran out, which was years, years that they kept like the kitchen stocked and so on, until finally they ran out of money, and then whoever was left had to, that the house sort of fell into disrepair. And now they're trying to fix it up again. But that statue's still there, the mausoleum's still there, the mansion is still there, and it's just an incredible story of how far someone will go to defy death.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, and the part that really just gets me is the whole he wakes up to look over across the street to see the mausoleum to his family to hope that that they will one day just wake up from the dead and just walk over and have some type of a meal again, whether it be all of them or if it would just the family member that died while Bowman was still alive. It's like you said, it's a fascinating story.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's a great one. And again, when you drive by, you can see the house, you can see the statue, and you ask yourself, what happened here? Like, how did that come to be? Everything's got a backstory, and sometimes it's a wildly interesting one.
Agreed. And I guess real quick too is there any other type of specific locations around Vermont that you wish you could film for an episode, or have you not really gotten that far?
No, so so just so you understand, PBS doesn't pay us any money. So everything you've watched on PBS or Amazon Prime has been funded by myself and Tony. We do it ourselves. Now most of it is just the work. Like we can do a lot of the editing and the writing and the hosting and all that stuff ourselves. But it does cost us money to do these things. So we pretty much lose money doing the TV show, but we do it because we love it. So that's why there's not a lot more of them, because quite frankly, we get no money for it. And we all have families to feed and so on. But there's no story that we haven't been able to get access to. So if something just sounds great, one of the things we've talked about for a while is doing like a longer piece on the Bennington Triangle down in southern Vermont. And that's something I would very much like to look into a little more, because I think it's a really intriguing story. The strange disappearances, the legend of the man-eating rock, and all this other stuff. So yeah, like there's nothing that's been off limits. It's just that's the challenge. Like, what can you do? Sometimes what happens with a story is that there's a story, it's great, it's an amazing legend, but there's nothing to see. You know what I mean? Yep. I can give you an example. In Massachusetts, there's the ghost ship Mary Celeste, which was this ship that sailed itself allegedly across the whole ocean. It was a real ship, absolutely, and it was found, thousands of miles away. And like, how did it do that? How did the ship sail? And there was nothing wrong with it. The crew was all gone. And if pirates had raided the ship, they would have stolen stuff. Nothing was stolen. And you don't ever, in the middle of the ocean, you don't abandon a sailing ship unless like that's your last possible hope, right? Because you'll die out there. Right. And so how did the whole crew disappear? Nothing stolen, nothing, ravaged or anything. And the ship sails itself across the ocean. Intriguing, crazy story. The ship has been long gone for centuries. the port it sailed from in Marion, Massachusetts is long gone. And so what would I go there to film? Right? I could go stand at the edge of the ocean and go, imagine this, right? But then that's not very interesting to watch. And we don't have the
No.
kind of money to like do a big recreation where we actually like build a ship, and act it out or whatever. So there's some stories that are fantastic. And that's why I'm so grateful that I have the podcast, because in the podcast we can do it. It's theater of the mind. You don't need to, you can see it in your head as opposed to actually going there.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's, and like every type of new technology that comes our way nowadays is fascinating. But I don't know about you, Jeff, but I'm just not a fan of the whole AI thing. But I mean,
It's scary.
in this case, yeah, it is. And I bet it's kind of scary for you because you kind of hear the horror stories about people that are losing their job because AI can just read the book and they don't have to pay anybody. They don't have to pay AI, this and that, and for you, it's like, yeah, you're a podcast host and stuff, but I mean, an AI could just literally just take your job over too, just by just hosting too. But I don't see that happening anyway, because I mean, who would still write the episode like you and Ray do?
Well, right. So, but it's not just that. Like, yeah, AI is definitely a frightening thing, but it's also pretty cool too. Like, you can run from it, or you can try to learn like how you can use it to make yourself better. And yeah, for sure, it's frightening. So my book publisher that I write books as well, and I had joked. I said, "So when are you going to just fire me and use AI?" And I got the most frightening and honest answer ever. My publisher said to me, he said, "Well, if we do a book with AI, we can't copyright it, which means anyone can steal it." So the only thing protecting me there is the fact that if you let AI write a book for you and you publish it, anybody can steal it. If it's a hit, I can just put it out too, and there's nothing you can do about it because you didn't write it. So I was like, oh, good. So I'm protected because of copyright law and nothing else.
Right? Like, I mean, I wish that there's something in place for everybody, but I just know, I just don't want to see another Terminator. We don't.
We're almost there. We're so close, right?
We are.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. I don't know. It's just it all depends on who you talk to. Like, I did not know about the copyright thing. Like, if AI were to write something that can't be copyrighted, which I think it's like interesting that way. But didn't they? I don't remember the name of it, but I know that they did have some sort of AI comic that got released. So it makes me wonder now. So does that mean that's not copyrighted? That comic that this quote right. AI did?
If AI created it, it's not copyrighted. You could steal it. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't sell it. They can sell it. It just means that you could steal it if you want. That's all.
Right. That's interesting. Anyway, I'm not trying to throw people be like, yeah, go do that. Yeah, no. But yeah, okay. So I guess that answers a couple questions too. But I'll just ask them anyway, Jeff. So anyway, since you are doing all the production and stuff for the show, so one of the questions I wanted to ask was, because of the way that you just mentioned, it didn't look like a big budget and this and that. So it made me wonder, like, were you purposely filming the episodes like almost like that, like that grainy, low budget type atmospheric, nostalgic feel to make it like more creepier, I guess is what I was trying to ask? Or
might have just been what we can afford. I mean, so it's funny working on the TV side of New England Legends. What's cool is like we have some talented friends that do work in TV production and so on, and like this is sort of like how this creative field works. You beg, borrow, and steal everything you can. So like, hey, I'm working on this project. Can you come help me and just film a couple things for me? And you're like, yeah, cool. And then you're working on something and you call your favor back in with me. That's a pretty common thing. There's stuff we do for money because we need to eat and we need to pay rent and all that other stuff. And then there's stuff we do because for love. And this has been a labor of love since the beginning. I believe in it. I love it. I adore it. I adore the people I've met and the places I've seen because of it. And so we do it. We do it when we can afford it and when we have the time. And you always hope that the stories resonate with people and that you get to do more.
Perfect. And Jeff, I want to go back a little bit to like when we first started because I know like as we've been talking, we've been kind of jumping back and forth to different things, which is all fine. I just feel like I didn't get a chance to ask you a few things when you were talking about growing up in Connecticut. Uh, One of the things is as you grown up, when you got into like the ghost stories, your local legend, stuff like that. At the time of growing up, was there any type of books that you had a favoritism for? Like you always just loved that book so much that you read it probably 100 times.
Oh gosh. So I read Hans Holzer books when I was growing up, Brad Steiger, those eerie, I used to love the old TV shows like the haunted history shows and amazing
Yep.
stories and that's incredible, all that stuff. So yeah, no, it's there's a ton of them that I used to just I wasn't one to repeat books too much. I always just wanted new stuff. You know what I mean? I always was like, oh, what else is out there? So yeah, it's there's always something. And I'm still that way. There's stuff I still love. There's podcasts I love to listen to. There's books I like to read and so on. It's when you love this stuff, you love it, right? You're around it all the time.
Mm. Yeah,
You know?
yeah. I agree. I agree. It's like, well, what did this person have that maybe you didn't hear about before or something?
It's like music, right? If you like a certain genre of music, well, you probably listen to a lot of it, and you're like, oh, what else? What else can I get introduced to? Like, who are you listening to? I want to hear it. And I adore the friendships I've made in this world, and the people I've connected to. We get to ask really big questions. We get to connect with people that are like fellow seekers, that don't just take answers on face value. They want to look and learn and do for themselves. And it's an incredible space, and it's a community that I'm really proud to be part of.
It really is a nice community,
Yeah.
and everybody is nice. And then there are times where, well, depending on the subject that you're talking about, you do bring in the and in a nice way, I'll say the worms.
Well, of course, but that's anywhere.
Yeah.
It's any. I mean, if you're a group of dentists, right? Like, there's probably some that are really nice and some that are jerks. Like that's people.
That's just the way the world spins, unfortunately.
Yeah,
so
I've never found any group that doesn't have a few bad apples, but it doesn't mean you throw out the whole bunch, right?
no,
Just,
no,
you still do what you do because you love it.
that's right. Now, Jeff, part of growing up too, was there any type of location that you just really wanted to check out? Either like to this day, maybe you haven't gotten the chance to check to, but you're always telling yourself, "Oh, I need to go there because it's always been on my bucket list."
Well, so for a long, long time, my dream place was the White House in Washington, D.C. And I actually got to go there. I got to go in and interview some of the staff and talk about the ghosts and so on for a children's book I wrote, like, oh God, like 10, more than 10 years ago now. And it was amazing. It was an incredible experience. However, I only got to go like on the first floor, and then like to some of the offices where I interviewed the chief usher, which was a great experience. I would love to spend the night in the Lincoln bedroom. And it turns out the only way to get a night in the Lincoln bedroom is you have to be invited by the first family. Like the president and the first family that's their space. No one is allowed up there without their invitation. And because I like to keep my presidential campaign contributions at zero, that's what I'm comfortable giving to any presidential campaign ever in my entire life. I don't give the kind of money that's going to allow me a night in the Lincoln bedroom. So the only way to get up there would be if some president in the future, if you're listening, future president, is spooked or something by something ghostly in the White House and wants to have me come over for the night. I will accept your invitation, regardless of political affiliation. I'll be happy to come look for ghosts in the upper floors of the White House. But until then, I guess that'll have to remain a dream.
Man, I'm trying to think of a place that I would love to go to. Maybe St. Augustine. I would love to go check out that lighthouse, and then
Yeah.
I would obviously would love to go to see Stonehenge in the UK.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool place. I've been to both, and Stonehenge is Stonehenge is tough because it's so many tourists. Like
Yes.
it's tough to appreciate a sacred or haunted place when you're surrounded by literally hundreds of people. And I get it. I get why they're there. They're there the same reason I'm there, right? Because you're like, wow, So, but at the same time, um, yeah, it's a cool and powerful place. But there's a lot out there for sure.
Right. It's there's just so many locations too that it really is hard to pinpoint. But I mean, kind of like what you were saying with growing up with some of the TV shows. I think that's why I want to go with like Tudo, with just because of the way whatever I was watching at the time really presented those locations. So it
Yeah,
makes you, it's like that fascination kicks in, and you're like, man, I'd just love to see this with my own eyes, and just go there just because, as we were talking before about, the energy, I would love to feel the energy around just to see like what I can pick up on.
oh, and you should, by the way. Like if play, and this goes for anybody, right? If a location calls to you, answer, go there, like make the effort, right? Go become part of the story. That's such an amazing thing to do.
Right, right. And speaking of which, you guys just released the forgive me, the night there on the side of the road.
Oh, the Westford Night, yeah, in
Thank you.
Massachusetts.
Yes, yeah, you guys just released that one, and that's all. That's a fascinating tale, and I, I think it's quite a drive for me. But I mean, still, maybe one day I'll check it out on the side of the road.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, no, it's worth seeing. It's a neat story because I love historical um, places that sort of shake up what we thought we knew, right? The idea that
Hmm.
there were like Knights Templar here before Christopher Columbus and so on. It's cool. It's cool when you forget that sometimes like the narrative of history is told by the winners and told by people in power. And
Hmm.
if you dig enough, sometimes you learn that there's other stories that are worth hearing as well.
Yep. Yep. Now, real quick, Jeff, I just want to wrap up like a few questions for you because I don't want to take much more of your time too. But so going back to you reading other people's works and everything else, and I think you kind of uh, put it in a little bit of how you were becoming an author, but maybe you could go more in depth. But like at what point did you decide like, okay, maybe I should start trying to write my own books?
I can tell you exactly what happened. So, I started in newspapers and magazines in the mid '90s, and I loved the Halloween feature. And then I started a website called GhostVillage.com in 1999 because I wanted to learn how to build websites, and I wanted to put some of my articles somewhere. I needed a place, and so I did that. And then I wrote my first book in 2004, and that came because I started receiving books on ghostvillage.com from publishers because they wanted reviews of some of their haunted books, and so I was making contacts with publishers and sort of building my platform. And then if anyone out there is an aspiring writer or author, I can't recommend enough that you read the book On Writing by Stephen King. It's his memoir on writing. And even if you're not a fan of his fiction, it's a fantastic book for writers. And Stephen King talks about how every writer has many, many books that inspire them, where you're like, wow, this is such a great book. If only I was this good, right? And that's true of anybody in any creative field, music, art, painting, whatever. Um, but once in a while, a book comes along that's so terrible that you realize, wait a minute, I'm better than this right now. And I got that book back when I was getting review copies for ghostvillage.com, and the book arrived in the mail, and I knew the author, by the way, and I'm not going to say the name because I think this person is a good and kind person, but just a terrible writer. And I read the book and I just went, this is crap. This is awful. I could write a way better book than this. And so I started pitching ideas and I got my first book contract. So thank you for the inspiration. And I'm sure this is true everywhere, right? Like musicians that are just like writing songs and going, come on, this may not be Stairway to Heaven by Zeppelin, but it's better than some of the crap out there. And then you hear a song that you're like, I know it's better than that. That's it. I'm gonna start shopping this thing around. And I think at some point, as long as you can handle tons and tons of rejection, once in a while you break through, and then magic happens.
Perfect. So I have two more questions for you, Jeff, and I'll try to put them into like one. So I'm trying to figure out how I want to word it to make it sound more better. But out of all the books that you have written, per se, which one would you say was the most challenging? And if there is a book that you have published that you wish you could actually go back and change or maybe update, which one or ones could it be?
So the most challenging book to write was my memoir, which was about climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, which is not all that much of a paranormal book. I'm very good at writing other people's stories, like interviewing them and knowing, sort of figuring out what to leave in and what to leave out. That's something that I'm pretty confident in. But when you're telling your own story, it's a lot harder because it's tough to be objective when you're talking about yourself. So that was definitely the most challenging, but also really rewarding too, because that was such a special experience when I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro to write about it from a physical and spiritual standpoint. The one I would love to update, and I might, by the way, was my second book way back from 2005. It was called Communicating with the Dead, and it was about the ways and methods people have used to try to communicate with the dead over the years. And that's one where some of the information was just sort of dated. Some of it was wrong. I did the best at the time, but later on, I'm like, God, I would love another pass at that. It's since been taken out of print, so if you find it, you're finding a used copy somewhere. But that's one I tell myself, like, one of these days, maybe I'll sit down and redo that one. But then that's hard for me because I'm like, I've already been there and done that. I always like want to work on the next new thing. That's more my speed, but you never know. One day I might sit down and revisit that one.
Well, I mean, I could see that get an updated version with the way technology has evolved and the different ways that people have communicated with the dead nowadays. I mean, there's got to be a little bit more to help you back up maybe some of the old claims to fix them and maybe add some new techniques that people may not have even thought of. So, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, well, no, sure. I mean, yeah, there was so many things that, were weren't even around back then. There's been people that have been developing equipment and ideas and concepts in the last 5-6 years that none of that was even in existence then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always fascinating to hear like what the next new ghost hunting equipment is. And it's like, well, what can this baby do? You know what I mean? Like, is it worth it? Like, is it cool? Like, I guess it depends on the person, really. Like, some people may not. Like, okay, so I know you write with or you work with Ghost Adventures crew. Like, there's some point where like I'm watching where I'm kind of like yelling at the TV.
Sure.
And then there's point where I'm just like, that's weird. Like, that's interesting. And I think most of that time is with the it's the SLS, I want to say.
Yeah, the camera.
Yeah. I don't really know how I feel about that per se, and I've seen other people use it on their show, but I don't know. There's something about that to me that makes me just go, I don't really know how I feel about it just yet. And it might take me some time, while others might find that to be like, oh my God, this is really fascinating. Like, that's really cool how it's picking up on this thing. And it just, I don't know. I mean, maybe because it's just the way that it's made and what it's supposed to have been or be, considering it is from the Xbox Connect or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
So I guess in a way is what I would have to do, which I don't know if that would ever happen, but if I could physically try out that piece of equipment myself and then go from there from my own experience, and then maybe I can wrap my head around of, well, maybe there's a rational explanation, or no, I can't debunk what I just saw.
Yeah, no, that piece of equipment's interesting to me because I own an Xbox Connect. I have one, and I play the games with my daughter, and
Nice.
I know how it works, and I know how it's supposed to work. It's built to look for human movement and human body parts, so the game doesn't confuse your dog walking by or that chair in the corner. It's not supposed to, right? If you're going to enjoy yourself in the game, it can't get confused between your human body and the dog trotting by, or the chair behind you, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So when Microsoft developed this, they made the software open source, which means they freely allow anyone to use it, which makes sense because they want you to develop games that they can sell, and more people buy Xbox Connects and so on and so on. So that's all out there. Bill Chappell, who made the made the SLS cam, and I know Bill very well. I've known him for years, and I'm going to see him next weekend, as a matter of fact. He took that software, he took the camera, and he made it look a little bit more into the infrared part of the spectrum. And the software is doing what it does. It looks for people, it looks for human movement, and then it maps it into the software just like it does with the game. And so what I like about it is, when an EMF meter goes off, there's a million things that'll set an EMF meter off. We live on a big magnet called Earth, right? There's the wind could shift and you can get a flutter on an EMF meter. It doesn't mean there's a ghost there necessarily. It just means there's a electromagnetic force being exerted on that piece of equipment. When the SLS camera finds a person and maps it in, well, shoot. You know what I mean? You start scratching your head going, the software's doing what it's designed to do. Look for people. And it just found one, but I don't see anyone there. And then it gets interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess I didn't realize how it was made, so I didn't really look into that aspect. But yeah, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
That makes it more interesting now. And I open so the open source to where anybody can use it. Okay, so that's probably where or why like Ghost Stop, like that company uses it for some of their equipment now and stuff like that, and whoever else, because I know there's like other ghost equipment companies.
Oh, yeah, tons.
But yeah, so I guess it's just one of those pieces of equipment where, once again, I'll just have to check it out. Like one equipment that I would love to get my hands on is Boo Buddy, the one that can interact. I think that is really fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so much stuff out there, and there's people that are still developing new things and working off of other ideas. And I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. Maybe one day we'll get to the point where, we've got some piece of equipment that offers us even more compelling evidence that there's really something out there. I love it. And I think it's great that people are doing that. But for me, again, my favorite part is still going to the place, experiencing it, and becoming part of the story.
All right, and I'll leave it right there for that. So, Jeff, to wrap things up now is, I first of all, I just want to appreciate your time for talking with me today and everything else. And I know we've been trying to do this for over a year now, and I'm trying to remember if I forgot to reach back out to you or what, because I know you're a busy guy too. So
yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So I guess, Jeff, is there any upcoming projects that you're allowed to talk about? Are we going to be seeing any more like New England Legends episodes?
Yeah. So we're working on the edit and the filming of another New England Legends episode for Amazon Prime and PBS. I've got a brand new book coming out for Christmas this year called The Fright Before Christmas: Surviving Krampus and Other Yuletide Monsters. That literally comes out like in a week. And it's a fun look at the holiday and all the monsters and scary stuff. If you think Halloween is scary, turns out it's just the warm-up act for the scariest holiday of the year, which is Christmas by far. And then I've got a fall story tour that I'll be all over New England, and I'll be in various states too, like Michigan, and I'll be in Wisconsin and Virginia and so on. So I've got live appearances, over 40 of them between now and December. So I'll be all over the place doing, talking about this stuff live and in person if people want to check me out. And you can see all that on my website, which is my name, jeffbelanger.com.
Perfect. And that's what going to be the last thing I was going to ask you is people wanting to keep up to date with you. Where can people find all your stuff?
My website, and you can find me on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, or whatever Twitter calls itself today.
Yeah, whatever
you want to call it. I don't even know.
I don't. It's Twitter or something.
Yeah.
I saw it written out once, and I was just like, I don't even know what to call it. So
it's like when Prince changed his name into a symbol. You're like, okay, whatever. I don't know.
It's a symbol. Yeah,
it's a symbol now. The website formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah, that one. X.
Yeah.
All right, Jeff. Well, thank you so much again, and maybe later on down the road we can chat again about something Vermonty again. And if you're ever up in Vermont, maybe we can meet up or something.
Sounds good, Paul. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And for everybody else listening, I hope you enjoyed. And remember, keep your eyes open because you just never know if an apparition will appear in front of you.
This call is being recorded.
Welcome to the Haunted Vermont podcast.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, Paul. That was a very alluring voice that said this call is being recorded. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I should have probably warned you about that. Yeah.
No, it was funny. Gary, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all good.
I'd leave all this in, but you do you.
Oh, right. Well, maybe I could put this in at the blooper reel at the very end.